Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In North Dakota, police arrested over 100 people this weekend who gathered for a peaceful march opposing construction of the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline. The demonstrators, who call themselves protectors, not protesters, were arrested after they were confronted by police in riot gear carrying assault rifles. They say police pepper sprayed them, then arrested them en masse. This is footage from the Sacred Stone camp.
You're all under arrest! Hey! Back off! Hey! You're under arrest! No, you guys are going together! Do not be afraid! Stand in prayer!
Those arrested face charges including riot, reckless endangerment, criminal trespass, assaulting an officer, and resisting arrest. Organizers also say officers fired rubber bullets at drones the water protectors were using to document police activity. We'll go to North Dakota after headlines to speak with Tara Hauska of Honor the Earth and Sachin Seacham of the West Coast Women Warriors Media Collective. We'll also speak to Shailene Woodley, who was arrested during a protest during the pipeline after Indigenous Peoples Day, and with Dea Schlossberg, a filmmaker who was charged with 3 felonies and is facing 45 years in jail for filming another pipeline protest in Walhalla, North Dakota. In Pennsylvania, some 55,000 gallons of gasoline spilled from a ruptured pipeline into the Susquehanna River Friday, threatening the water supply of thousands of residents downstream. The Pennsylvania American Water Utility on Sunday lifted a warning to residents to limit their water use, but said it would continue to monitor water quality. In Iraq, Turkish troops fired artillery on ISIS positions around Mosul as Iraqi forces and Kurdish Peshmerga fighters advanced into the suburbs of the city. The presence of some 2,000 Turkish troops near Mosul has angered many Iraqis as well as Iraq's military, which is denying Turkey's claims of participation. The fighting came as U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter traveled to Iraq, where he promised stepped-up air support for the fight. Meanwhile, the United Nations Children's Fund is warning that as many as 1.5 million people may be affected by the fight to recapture Mosul, half of them children. And humanitarian workers say some 200,000 people may need shelter during this offensive. A U.S. federal court has ruled that no one, not even the President of the United States, has the power to declare torture legal. Friday's unanimous ruling by a panel of judges on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals reinstates a lawsuit against the military contractor CACI, or CACI. The suit charges it directed and participated in torture at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in 2004, where it was hired by the U.S. to provide interrogation services. 4 Iraqi men say they were subjected to extreme temperatures, electric shocks, broken bones, death threats, and sexual abuse. The California National Guard's attempting to claw back re-enlistment bonuses paid out to nearly 10,000 soldiers at the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. The Los Angeles Times reports the bonuses were worth at least $15,000 per soldier, with many receiving thousands more in student loan repayments. The Pentagon says an audit showed the soldiers received the bonuses, although they should have been deemed ineligible. Those refusing to repay the bonuses face interest charges, wage garnishments, and tax liens. Many of the veterans affected suffered combat injuries. In Syria, heavy fighting has resumed in Aleppo after a 3-day ceasefire ended with the United Nations saying it was unable to evacuate any of the besieged city's sick and wounded. Russia and Syria announced the humanitarian pause last week, but UN Humanitarian Affairs spokesman Jens Larke said aid workers were unable to reach those in need.
Medical evacuations of sick and injured people could unfortunately not begin this morning in East Aleppo as planned, because the necessary conditions were not in place to ensure safe, secure and voluntary evacuation of sick and critically wounded people and their families.
Russian and Syrian officials said rebels prevented civilians from leaving Aleppo during the break in fighting, accusing them of taking human shields. In France, hundreds of police officers have begun clearing the refugee camp in Calais, known as the Jungle, ahead of its planned demolition. The first of nearly 7,000 camp residents boarded buses Monday morning bound for refugee centers elsewhere in France. The camp has been home to refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, and other war-torn regions who are seeking to reach England by crossing through the Channel Tunnel. Overnight on Sunday, some residents and their supporters protested, setting fire to portable toilets. Police responded with volleys of tear gas canisters. Activist François Gianoc said many fear they'll be deported to another European country or sent home.
Maybe about half, maybe a bit less, will leave of their own accord. For the rest, they'll leave in the buses if they are compelled to. Over 2,000 people have left in the last few weeks, and this weekend there are lots of people leaving for Paris elsewhere.
British authorities said they were working to resettle some of the camp's 1,300 unaccompanied children, but many advocates for the refugees fear minors are being swept up on buses and shipped elsewhere in France. In media news, AT&T has agreed to purchase Time Warner for $85 billion. If approved by federal antitrust regulators, the merger would give AT&T control over Warner Brothers film and television studios, along with CNN, TNT, HBO, and other brands. Critics warn of further limits to competition and higher prices for customers. The merger could also allow AT&T to give preferential treatment to streaming video from Time Warner's companies, which would violate the principles of net neutrality. On the campaign trail, a spokesperson for Hillary Clinton said the proposed merger raises questions and concerns. Donald Trump's campaign took a harder line, saying in a statement, quote, Donald Trump will break up the new media conglomerate oligopolies that have gained enormous control over our information, unquote. In election news, Donald Trump arrived in Florida Sunday for a 3-day trip. Trump likely needs to win Florida's 29 electoral college votes in order to have any hope of winning the White House. At a rally in Naples, Trump blasted polls showing he's doing poorly among women voters.
I really think those polls are very inaccurate when it comes to women. I think we're doing better with women than with men, frankly. So we're setting records with men, but I want to set records with women, to me. And I hate to tell the men this, but if I could swap, I'd swap you out so fast.
Trump's comments came after another woman came forward Saturday accusing Trump of inappropriate sexual behavior. Adult film star Jessica Drake says Trump grabbed her in a hug and kissed her without permission and later offered her $10,000 in use of his private jet if she would join Trump for dinner in his suite. Drake is the 11th woman to accuse Trump of unwanted sexual advances since an Access Hollywood tape surfaced showing Trump boasting of sexually assaulting women. Meanwhile, a new Reuters poll shows that half of Republican voters would reject the results of the presidential election if Hillary Clinton wins. The poll came after the final presidential debate where Donald Trump refused to say if he'll accept the election results. WikiLeaks continues to release emails from the account of John Podesta, the chair of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. One set of emails reveals Hillary Clinton secured a $12 million donation to the Clinton Global Initiative in 2015 from the King of Morocco on the condition that she speak at an event in Marrakesh. Bill and Chelsea Clinton ultimately spoke in Hillary Clinton's place. The donation came as Clinton prepared to announce her candidacy. On Sunday, Clinton was asked whether the donation amounted to a pay-to-play scheme.
Nothing to say about WikiLeaks other than I think we should all be concerned about what the Russians are trying to do to our election and using WikiLeaks very blatantly to try to influence the outcome of the election.
Major websites across the internet were unable to millions of users on Friday as a massive cyber attack shut down such popular destinations as PayPal, Netflix, Twitter, Reddit, and Spotify. The attack employed thousands of web cameras, DVRs, and other Internet-enabled household devices which were infected by malware. Internet security experts have long warned that devices on the so-called Internet of Things are poorly protected and pose a major security risk. In Venezuela, supporters of President Nicolas Maduro briefly stormed the National Assembly Sunday, interrupting opposition lawmakers pushing for Maduro's removal from office. About 100 pro-government activists pushed their way past security guards and onto the floor, halting an emergency session of Parliament for about 45 minutes. Opponents of President Maduro and his Socialist Party were left furious on Thursday when courts blocked a national referendum on removing Maduro. Lawmakers passed a largely symbolic resolution calling for the international community to help restore democracy by any means necessary. Each side accused the other of fomenting a coup. This is Venezuelan ruling party deputy Hector Rodriguez.
They have made us waste time today in a crude attempt to stage a coup, like in Brazil, like in Paraguay, like in Honduras. In Venezuela, we do not have the conditions for them to stage a coup.
This comes as Venezuela is undergoing a massive economic crisis, which had led to shortages of food, medicine, and other necessary goods. In Washington, state police shot and killed a pregnant mother of 3 inside her home on the Muckleshoot Indian Reservation Friday night. 23-year-old Renee Davis died after a pair of King County Sheriff's deputies opened fire on her. In a statement, the Sheriff's Department said Davis was armed with a handgun. Davis's foster sister said police were conducting a wellness check after receiving a report that Davis was suicidal. A recent investigation by In These Times magazine found Native Americans were more likely to be killed by police than any other group in the United States. Go to democracynow.org for our extended interview. Protests against racial oppression and police brutality continue during the playing of the national anthem at sports events around the country over the weekend. San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick appeared at a post-game press conference Sunday wearing a Black Panthers Party T-shirt, building on the movement he sparked. At an NBA preseason game in Miami Friday, social worker Denasia Lawrence took a knee and unbuttoned her jacket to reveal a Black Lives Matter T-shirt as she performed the Star-Spangled Banner. In a statement on Facebook, Lawrence wrote, quote, "Right now, we're seeing a war on black and brown bodies. We're being unjustly killed and overly criminalized," unquote. And Tom Hayden has died. Hayden spent decades shaping movements against war and for social justice. He died at the age of 76. Tom Hayden was the principal author of the Port Huron Statement, the founding document of Students for a Democratic Society, known as SDS. The statement advocated for participatory democracy and helped launch the student movement of the 1960s. In 1968, Hayden became one of the so-called Chicago 8 and was convicted of crossing state lines to start a riot after he helped organize protests against the Vietnam War outside the Democratic National Convention. Speaking to Democracy Now!, Hayden described the extraordinary growth of the anti-war movement he helped lead during the 1960s.
The first march in April 1965 was called by SDS, which was then a small campus network that had been based on civil rights and student power. And we were surprised that 25,000 people came. That was then the largest anti-war march in American history, according to historians. Within 3 or 4 years, you would have 500,000 marching on both coasts, so 1 million, not once but several times a year. You would have a revolt in the armed forces by GIs who were throwing medals over the White House fence and who were in mutiny. You would have 4 million students caught up in protests, shutting down whole campuses by the spring of 1970.
Hayden, which is great. Tom Hayden passed away in Santa Monica on Sunday after a lengthy illness, after suffering from a stroke over a year ago. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.